All right, this is just touching on a point I raised in my last video. Inevitably, when you get in debates, eventually you get to this question of, you can make an argument that we should have 50 cals, we should have semi-automatics, we should have all kinds of handguns. Eventually, you'll get confronted with somebody who will come up and logically and correctly point out, well, if you favor the liberalization of access to these items, does not that also mean that you favor the availability of all weapons of every type, up to and including things like nuclear weapons? And most, maybe all, I don't know, people try and, most people will say no. However, I'm going to take the position that, yes, actually I do support that. I support the private ownership of any property up to and including nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. There's one reason in principle for this, and that reason is that if I had a choice, there's two options. There's three options. There's either the item in question doesn't exist, the item in question is available to everybody, or the item in question is available only to one class or one person. Now, option one, where it doesn't exist, that would be great. And I've said before, if I could wave my hand and make all guns disappear, I would be tempted to do that. And I probably wouldn't. But with nuclear weapons, I actually might. But the truth is that you can't put genies back in bottles. Even if we were able to destroy all the nuclear weapons in the world right now, the knowledge on how to build them and the knowledge that they exist is out there. Now, of the two remaining options, either allowing restricted access or universal access, allowing only one class to own is very problematic and is basically a guarantee for abuse and misuse. Now, the objection here is going to be, well, so you want just everybody to have a nuke. Well, that's kind of an impossible scenario. As far as I'm aware, nukes are extremely complicated pieces of technology. They're very difficult to produce, and were they to be freely, or when I say freely, if they were to be legally available, my guess is that they would cost many tens of millions of dollars, which means some crazy person is not going to be able to just buy one. I mean, think about it. Anybody who's producing nuclear weapons, I mean, if you walked into a gun store today and you acted like an aggressive homicidal maniac, they probably wouldn't sell you a gun. Just not because they're nice or they care about other people necessarily, but because they're worried that you might kill them. Nothing to do with greed, it's self-interest. With nukes, where the destructive potential is, I don't know, billions of times more, they would exercise many, many times more caution. The other thing is, even for them to sell it to you, I mean, you'd already have to have proven that you're not crazy. To have millions and millions of dollars to be able to buy one means the scenario that just some crazy guy is going to have one, very, very unlikely. Is it hypothetically possible? Yes. The situation we have now, we could have a crazy president. A lot of us would allege that we've already had crazy presidents. The argument that, well, we can only trust this with the government just doesn't wash, because that argument ultimately rests on the faulty assumption that there is some class of people who are better, wiser, more trustworthy. And if anything, governments have proven that they are composed of individuals who, by and large, are actually the opposite of all that. Our government has used nukes. Maybe maybe you think that was okay. I happen to be in the camp that it wasn't. But even ignoring that, our government has lost nukes, so-called broken arrows, and they've also failed to keep the technology secret. So the Soviet Union was able to build a bomb from copying us, and that's also the case with Israel, China, and maybe even South Africa. So our government's ability to maintain the integrity and the safety of these weapons is in doubt. And so to say, well, they should have them, but no one else should. I mean, like I said, if I said battleships were legal, that doesn't mean everyone's going to have a battleship, because a battleship would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. If I say nukes should not be legally prohibited, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to have a nuke. Only people who, the only group for sure that would be able to have them are groups that can produce them. Now, in order to produce a nuke, it requires enormous amounts of capital, enormous amounts of expertise in numerous fields: metallurgy, physics, chemistry. The apparatus and everything entailed basically precludes anybody except for someone who's not crazy. And so you've got a situation where the only people who can possess them initially are people who are rational and who are intelligent, who can plan for the future, because there's no way you can build something that requires that much effort without having a plan for the future. So those people, given the fact that a prerequisite to building it requires that they have those mental faculties, it's groups that are able to produce them are not just going to sell them to some retard. I mean, if they were, a retarded person might sell a nuke to a retarded person, but a retarded person couldn't ever build a nuke. I'm sorry if I'm using that term in a derogatory way. I'm just saying, like, the scenario, the hypothetical scenario, this goes back to the proof by hypothetical. The conditions for that to happen are very improbable. Very, very improbable. And the other thing is, if someone was such a crazy person, I mean, chances that they would be able to even operate such a thing are pretty low. So, I know it makes people uneasy, and nuclear weapons are very powerful. I'm leery of them. But I just don't see any reasonable. The only argument against having them be legally available to everybody is one based on a caste system where there's this special magic group of people who are the wellspring of all virtue relative to the rest of us, and that's so obviously false that premise has to be rejected. And the only two alternatives is there being no nukes, which is not possible, and having them be available. And the thing is that the fear of having them being legally available to anybody is not really founded in anything that's particularly likely. I think it's more likely that we have a crazy politician who gets us into a nuclear war. This isn't very well known, but Dick Cheney almost got us into wars with Russia on at least one occasion during the Georgian invasion of South Ossetia. He actually advocated that we use our military to prevent the Russians from asserting their role there. And to his credit, I will thank George Bush for this. He said, no, that's insane. And he was correct. That is insane. And yet, Dick Cheney was the Vice President of the United States. And, I mean, right there, that's pretty cool. I mean, there have only been so many vice presidents and so many presidents, and a high proportion of them seem willing to risk that. And Dick Cheney wasn't the first, and he won't be the last, I'm sorry to say. So, this is probably, I guess you could debate whether this is really a gun control issue or not. You will say, I mention it because it is in principle similar, and also because when you get in debates, people will bring up that, well, logically that would mean nuclear weapons, and I have the perfect answer to that, and it's, yes, it is logical, and empirically there's no reason really to oppose it. To me, that's the only real answer to that question. Now, if you want to, there are other answers you can give. They're not as logical, they're not as correct, in my opinion. You could say, oh, well, they can't be used for defense. That's totally not true, but I've heard libertarians say they have no place in existence because you can't target them particularly at an assailant. That's not true. If there was an invasion fleet off the coast, you could be reasonably assured that nuking that invasion fleet would not kill anybody else. Now that wouldn't work if there was an army occupying a city or something. Yeah, then a nuclear weapon couldn't really be used. But well, that's kind of a little tangential. But anyway, I just thought I'd address it. I realized this is probably an opinion that most people aren't going to share, but I thought I'd put it out there. So, all right, that's it.